Morning all. The Zurich Chess Challenge continues to produce fantastic games. Just played yesterday, Magnus Carlsen against the Italian number one, Fabiano Caruana, who actually massacred Magnus in the blitz, playing with the black pieces. So was he going to do better in the classical time controls against Magnus playing white? So Magnus playing white played e4, and we have e5, knight f3, knight c6, Ruy Lopez, knight f6, so the Berlin defense, d3, a choice also on Vichy Anand, a quiet choice. Bishop c5 now is the most popular move here for black, and white's third most popular choice is bishop takes c6, which Vichy has tried in an earlier round, and this is the choice of Magnus as well here, inflicting structural damage. It gives black the bishop pair though, and if black's feeling very aggressive, black could consider trying to castle queenside. So d takes c6, white plays h3, preventing the pin with bishop g4, and we see here now the main move is knight d7. It looks to carry ideas like knight f8 to e6 or g6, where it can highlight these squares. f6 was also useful sometimes because e5 is under fire. It has to be protected in some way pretty soon. So here we see now bishop e3. Doesn't matter about the double pawns here. Black doesn't really want to do that. White would have comfortable f-file pressure if that happened as compensation. Black just retreated the bishop to d6. I'm kind of out of most of the book now on live book, so I'll put on a kibitzer. White stands slightly better from this modest approach to the opening. We see now the move knight c3. It might have been tempting to try for d4. Let's have a quick look at d4 here. I think black could just play queen e7, just keep that strong point, that e5 strong point in this position, and it might actually be okay. This kind of position, for example, black could time e takes d4 and maybe f6, and black still got nice control of e5 here. This looks okay for black. So anyway, knight c3 was played instead of that d4, and black now seizes the opportunity to clamp down on d4 actually by playing c5. From an engine point of view, this represents a tiny inaccuracy, at least for my Houdini engine. It seems as though black could be chilled out about d4, like we've just seen. In fact, just castle, and when d4 happens, is it such a big deal here? Okay, so but black did play the more committal looking c5, so it clamps down on d4, but of course d4 is not the only strategic break available for white here. White could try to play for f4, and let's have a look at this. After castles, knight f8, the knight is heading to reinforce these two squares. Potentially it will just go to g6 to hold f4, and in fact knight d2 now has twofold purposes. The knight can go potentially to c4, but also f4 is now on the cards, so there's a lot of pressure potentially on that e5 pawn. Black really can't radically try and stop f4. I believe it looks crazy to consider something like g5. White will just play queen h5 hitting g5, knight c4, and this is a big advantage to white. And there's undermining operations like h4 available here, and then f to crash through with maybe f4 soon. I don't think this is that good. If h4 here, or even knight takes e5, this whole structure is being dismantled. So f4 is happening, whether black likes it or not. It does seem to be happening here. So knight g6, at least for the moment though, black is guarding against f4 with quite a lot of pieces. Knight c4, bishop e6, but now Magnus puts even more preparation into this f4 with knight e2, and he doesn't even mind the double pawns here if bishop takes c4. So this f4 is really being supported. Let's have a look at this. If bishop takes c4, I think white's grip on d5 is good. This is an advantage to white from an engine point of view. There's pressure on d5. It's not a bad position to have here on that d file. White can switch plan, in fact, maybe to eye either d5 or f5. Even knight g3 is interesting here, and we can get knight f5, and it's a small advantage to white technically. So black really doesn't want to play bishop takes c4, even though it might be structurally tempting to make the pawn structure kind of symmetrical. Black played instead queen d7, preserving the bishop pair for the moment. But now, to loosen black's control of f4, this bishop on d6 is taken. Knight takes d6 track. So we see c takes d6, and now the time is ripe for f4. And it immediately threatens f5, actually winning a piece. So black can't routinely castle, say. He actually just takes, knight takes f4. What has black done with this operation? It looks a very pleasant position for white here. Knight h5 might be on the cards. Queen h5 might be a comfortable move to play. b3 just to put the brakes on c4 might be a good move. Opening up the centre might be good. There's a wealth of plans here. Black, for the moment, takes on f4, and we see rook takes f4. There's an immediate target on this f file in principle, this f7 pawn here already. White could just try and double. And if black's king is on the king side, you can imagine this is going to lead to a potential massacre. Let's have a quick look at this. If black just castled king side, let's go with, say, queen f3. This position, could white attack from this position? It's opposite coloured bishops. Maybe actually this is a this might be a tenable position. It just looks a little bit on the uncomfortable side. So bishop g8, it might actually be technically possible. The engines are indicating this is a little bit better for white, but not much. So it did seem a theoretical possibility, at least, for black to try and consider castling kingside. In this position, though, this strange-looking move was played. I think the intention that black wants is to play for d5 without losing c5. And okay, d5 and d4 is nice in principle if it wasn't dropping c5. You know, maybe d4 later and gaining space. The scope of the bishop could be proven to be a little bit better than white's scope of the bishop if that's hemmed in. And so black plays for this d5 plan, it seems, by playing b6. But I really think, you know, the routine just casting kingside might actually be technically preferable, because actually, how does white, you know, play this position? c4 is a concern, just to dissolve, start dissolving some pawns. Say b3, f6. It's difficult to see how white could improve the advantage. Okay, you know, there's a little grip. It looks a bit awkward, the structure, as though black, you know, wants to play for d5. White has some pressure, but yeah, it looks okay for black. So we see instead this b6 move. The problem with b6, as shown here, is that white now has an a4, a5 plan if black did castle queenside later. That's one problem. Now d5 looks to be on the cards, on the other hand, for gaining space in the centre. White now plays queen h5, and black gets on him with his plan immediately with d5. Is there a downside to this? Well, the upside is d4 would gain more space, push this bishop back. White stops this now with d4, and black doesn't really, I think, want to take on d4 here. Bishop takes d4. The bishop actually looks quite good on d4, hitting g7. If d takes, I think we can just take on g7. Rook d1. It's time for rook d1. And white, with the black kings still in the centre, this is really dangerous now. This sort of position is going to be actually a force mate. So bishop takes d4. We can't really allow this bishop eyeing g7. So the position is kept closed with c4, but it's another pawn on the same colour as the bishop for the moment. Now Magnus undermines with b3, and it's actually threatening tactically to take and play d5. So say black routinely castle queenside. I think we can just take, and if takes we can play d5. That's horrible, winning a piece actually. So we see instead queen c6, being able to take with the queen, trying to keep a grip on these light squares. Magnus, though, he doesn't take on c4. If he did take on c4, I think, yeah, just queen takes c4, there might not be much going on here. We see instead rook a f1. And it looks as though this idea of the exchange sacrifice is emerging here. Because this bishop could actually be very useful. It's actually been made more effective in theory with these pawns on light squares. The bishop is running rampant on the dark squares in black's position already here in theory. Now if black castled kingside here, which he didn't actually, castled queenside, this is too dangerous for black's king safety in this particular position. It seems as though rook h4, threatening crude mate in 1, is difficult to parry. You know, if h6, I think we just butcher the king when bishop takes h6. And this is unpleasant. Black's going to get mated. So this is just an unplayable position. So black castled queenside. Now the big question is, in this position, does white, you know, really want to try to play for a win? How does he do this? Opposite coloured bishops sometimes favour the attacking player. In the endgame, they're often, of course, increasing the drawing chances quite frequently. Here, white first plays b takes c4 to lure the queen to c4, because if d takes c4 again, we just have d5 winning a piece, or nearly. Queen b5, temporary inconvenience, but a4, queen a5, it's actually still very, very good for white after queen e2 here. So even if it's not winning a piece, it's winning c4, and black's position is horrible. So black took with queen takes c4. Now here, does white really want to do this exchange sack on f7? Well, Magnus thought it was enough, because sometimes if you sacrifice the exchange for 1 or 2 pawns, what you need to assess is, are you able to increase the advantage slowly after that? Is there potential for accumulating advantages after that? In this particular situation, it seems the dark square bishop is potentially running rampant on the dark squares, and it might be worth almost a rook. So let's have a look. This is taken, rook takes. Now rook f8 fells, I think, to queen f5 check, because then we've got winning the rook like this. So the rook is challenged horizontally with rook d7, and Magnus simply just simplifies with rook takes d7, even though, you know, in theory he's almost down the material. But now, you know, 2 pawns for the exchange. E takes d5. I think this is one of the stronger moves in the position. The checks actually look tempting. It's interesting that even the engines prefer e takes d5 over these tempting checks. For example, queen f7 check. It still looks awkward for black. If king c8, queen takes a7. If king c6, you know, queen g7. This still looks awkward for black as well. If queen takes a7, d takes e4, then, you know, that's a problem. So e takes d5. So white's not going to lose his e pawn. 2 pawns for that exchange sacrifice. Is it enough here? The black king's exposed, the bishop's potentially running rampant, and I think there's another factor coming in here, that the white king's going to be as safe as houses soon. After g6 we see queen g4, king c7, queen e6, horrible coordination now, threats like d6. Also queen e5 check is immediately threatening to win the rook. The king goes to b7, check, queen c7. Magnus wants to keep the queens on. Queen e4 threatening things like d6 now and d5. That looks unpleasant. Queen gets out of the way. What else to stop d6? If queen d6, I think the bishop can unblockade here with bishop f4. Get the queen out of the way. Then d6. And then it starts to look nasty again. So, okay, the queen went just to d7 here. d6 check. Now if queen c6, Queen e7 is quite strong. If say king c8, bishop f4, with lots of threats like queen takes a7. This is really just unpleasant for black, this situation. I mean, it's already quite unpleasant here after d6. The black king went to a6, trying to get out of the way of things. Bishop f4. So can Magnus improve the potential of his position? Can he grow his advantage a little bit from here, the exchange down? So rook c8. The king now goes to h2. The queen stands beautifully on e4. Beautiful centralized queen here. Rook c4. Bishop g3 is played now. So very solid setup for white with that queen on e4. What can black actually do? Black's really tied down. The rook just goes back now to c8. There might be an opportunity for queen e2 here. Let's say h5 was played. Then maybe, well, along the ideas of queen e2, a4 for queen e2 to become more dangerous. If takes queen e7, you know, black's got to be careful about this d6 pawn. So anyway, the rook went back. We see check, king b7, and now these pawns start advancing. c4, they're going to be protecting each other soon. Queen c6. That Magnus just simply plays. It looks as though c4's attacked. He simply plays queen b3. The pawn is immune. If queen takes c4, which wasn't played, then d7 is actually winning, because the rook's the only one protecting the queen, and the rook's got to stop d8. So takes, we take here, and then we're a bishop up. So that's not possible to take that c4 pawn. Meanwhile, this pawn's now pinned, making c5 more dangerous. The king gets out of the way. Now again we see a4 seemingly leaving the c pawn to be taken. If queen takes c4, I think again we just play d7 here. It doesn't matter about queen takes b3. Black's overloaded here. So rook e8 was played, and Magnus now plays the move a5. He's seemingly knocking on the king, on the doors of the king here. And also a6 would be a nasty form pawn to create in black's camp, like a goal, hanging goal scorer around the king, around the goal. So you see king b7, stopping a6 at least, that form pawn. c5. Where are these pawns heading? What is white actually threatening? Well, with c5, the queen is now liberated, threatening things like queen f7. And also, a6 as a tactical idea is interesting too in many variations, because there's potentially a loose rook on e8 after d5, the queen moving, queen a4. So black's got to be extremely careful here. He plays actually king c8. It must be depressing for such a strong grandmaster like Caruana to have to play so many king moves in this position and not really to have much active counterplay. If he did try and go for white's king here, you know, with rook e2, let's see what happened. What would happen? There seems to be very strong moves in this position. d5 stopping the mate. Where does the queen go? If queen takes d7, how is the pawn stopped? If rook e1, that seems dangerous for queen g1. White actually can even play, well, just taking the rook here. That's hopeless. Just takes the rook. The bishop safeguarding e1. So this is not possible, it seems, because of d5 and d7. These pawns are really helping white's king safety in a way, not giving black much time to do anything. So king c8. Now a takes b6 is played. A takes b6. And here now we get some very powerful forcing moves. Magnus is prepared to do a pawn sack with d5. Very limited options for black. Queen takes c5. Now queen a4 hitting the rook. This is a combination to exploit the black's king Safety. Rook e3, check. King d7, queen b7 check. Not too many choices for black. If king d8 here, then bishop h4 check is very strong. That's a force mate in 7 actually. King e8 is played. d7 check. And the king is still having to defend against d8 queening, so it has to go here. Horrible. Check. The rook is forced to go to e7. And Magnus just plays queen c8 now. He's giving me a bishop up forcibly. After queen, black had to resign here. If queen takes, d takes, we just a bishop up. So yeah, a magnificent exchange sacrifice. It was made to look kind of quite easy, but this is the genius of Magnus Carlsen. He does seem to play in a way which seems to flow retrospectively in a very sort of comfortable manner, as if it was all quite easy. But the whole operation on the F file, playing for F4, culminated in an exchange sacrifice on the F file, and after that, the bishop and the pawns were running rampant. More than adequate compensation, it seemed, from the evidence of this game for sacrificing the exchange. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.